On today's Locked On Jayhawks, we round out the regular season schedule, early previews of Colorado and Coach Prime, and then the regular season finale at Baylor, plus our Hawk/Cinco room preview.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I'm Derek Johnson. You can give me a follow on Twitter at DJohnsonRadio. Thank you for making Locked On Jayhawks your first listen every day, and thank you to the everydayers catching each and every show. We are free and available everywhere you get your podcasts. You can also find us on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. On today's edition of Locked On Jayhawks, we're finishing out our early look at KU football opponents with the Colorado game and the at Baylor game. Then we'll get to our position preview of the Hawk Cinco room. And thank you to the everydayers catching each of those position previews and opponent previews. And of course, you can go back and catch all of those anywhere you get your podcast or on our YouTube page. This episode of Locked On Jayhawks is brought to you by Ultimate College Football Head Coach. It's a brand new mobile game that's completely free. It has no ads and 100% playable offline. Use the promo code LOCKEDONCFB, all caps, all one word, inside the game store to receive a free boost to your program. Begin your coaching legacy today. All right, we're going to start with the Colorado game, work to the Baylor game, and then finish with our position preview on this KU Football Friday. By the way, 6 days away from the opener for KU football, and we got week 0 football coming at you tomorrow, which I don't know if there's any like great games, but who cares? It's football, right? I mean, Florida State, Georgia Tech, I think an 11-point spread, right? That's not bad. Anyway, KU Colorado. So Colorado, among all the teams on KU's schedule, you might know or have seen as much about Colorado as any other team that Kansas is playing, which is funny because they aren't even, or at least weren't until this year in KU's conference. But they went 4-8 last season. It was the loudest 4-8 season that you will certainly imagine, but it was an explosive 3-0 start. I mean, they won that game against TCU. That was honestly one of my favorite games from last season. It was high scoring. It was up and down, back and forth. You had some awesome plays in it. Turns out that neither team ended up being that good, but you saw some flashy newcomers. And what's wild is Colorado had 72 new players on last year's roster. 45 of those 72 are already gone. So this is, again, kind of a new roster for the Buffaloes this year, but they do have 8 starters back on the offensive side of the football. Most notably has to be the quarterback, Jayson Sanders. Obviously, he's the son of the head coach, Deion Sanders, but also he's a very good quarterback. Travis Hunter is also back. He'll play on both ends of the football. He's a very dynamic receiver. And overall, Colorado, even with some of these talented skill players, right? They had Dylan Edwards before he transferred to Kansas State, some other good receivers. They only ranked 60th in the country a season ago, even despite having some of that star talent. They averaged 28 points per game, and they were only 133 in yards per carry running the ball, just 2.3 yards per carry. Now, that's a bit because they just didn't run it that much, and they took 52 sacks. In the college game, sacks count against your rushing total. So if you're not running as much and taking a bunch of sacks, it's going to hurt your running total. Partially, though, those sacks, the 52 of them on the offensive line, they had a bad offensive line last year, but also part of that was on Jayson Sanders. As good of a quarterback as he is, he does tend to, at sometimes, hold the ball too long. Like we've seen that with Russell Wilson through his NFL career. Even when Russ was doing really well in Seattle, he got sacked a lot, and he let it be known that he was unhappy about it. But part of it was just like, he just holds the ball a long time. You're going to get sacked more, right? Sacks, as much as they're an offensive line stat, are also a quarterback stat. But anyway, they were 30th in quarterback rating. They were 4th in the country in touchdown to interception ratio, and they were 16th in passing yards per game. So this was a very dynamic passing offense a season ago, really explosive passing game. You got your top quarterback. You got what has in Pick 6 previews, the number 3 receiver group in the Big 12, led by Hunter, Jimmy Horn, and some awesome transfers. But they are just 15th in running back group. Again, Dylan Edwards gone, and they're last for offensive line. So very unbalanced between those two. That line was already poor a season ago, as we just mentioned, the 52 sacks. Now they don't have 8 of their 10 from their 2 deep back. So they were bad. I guess you could argue, though, that's addition by subtraction. Like, it was bad, so they just replaced it with a bunch of new guys, and we'll see how that goes, right? I mean, it's a bunch of new transfers. They have like the top freshman left tackle, so maybe the line actually ends up being better, even though it's less experienced. I don't know. We'll wait and see. or it could be a disaster again, right? On the defensive end of the ball, 8 starters back for Colorado. Most notably is BJ Green, who's a defensive lineman, and Samuel Okunlola, who's another defensive lineman. I mean, they actually have a good D-line. Plus, you have Travis Hunter at the secondary, which, I mean, corner is probably the NFL position Travis Hunter will play. This was a very bad defense last season, though. They were 124th in scoring. They were 114th in points allowed per play. They were 130th in total defense. They were 116th in yards allowed per play, and that included 104th in yards allowed per carry and 111th in yards allowed per pass. So, like, they were just not a good defense last season. But they added a bunch in the portal. They're 19th in returning production on the defensive end, according to Pick Six Previews. It's the good defensive line, right? I mean, according to Pick Six Previews, they are a top 5 unit in the league with the D-line because they added 2 Pittsburgh starters. Green comes in from Arizona State, and they added a 3-year starter from Houston at the nose tackle spot. So, you know, if you're at least good on the defensive line, that's going to earn you some stuff on that defensive end where you won't be as bad. The back 7, though, you know, you do have star power with Hunter and Shiloh Sanders, but it seems like there's a lot of questions beyond that. Not a ton of depth on this team, not a ton of O-line play like last year, it feels like. So it's going to be interesting what they do this season. What's going to be the key for KU in this game? Throw away from Travis Hunter. Don't let him have a game-changing play. I think back to the TCU game where he made that unbelievable interception kind of diving. And the good news for KU in this game is that, okay, if Colorado doesn't have maybe as much depth, maybe they have the star power, but their number 2, their number 3, whatever, aren't nearly as good. Well, the good news for KU is because they're so balanced and because they have 3 stud receivers, guess what? If Travis Hunter's taking away LJ Arnold or Luke Grimm or Quentin Skinner that day, there's still 2 others that can kind of go off. So I think that's going to be a key for KU in that game and kind of using whoever is guarded by Travis Hunter as a decoy in a certain way. KU's depth of defensive backs and pass defense packages, I think, are going to be keys to this game. Obviously, Colorado likes to throw it around the yard. They're going to throw it around the yard. And so, and they're going to move fast. It's going to be a combination of a lot of guys are going to play. And also it's going to be a combination of a lot of guys are going to be the field at once. I've kind of said before, like, obviously you feel great about the 2 starting corners, the Mello and Kobe. What about the backups? Well, it's a lot of youth. Obviously, Demarius McGee's a little bit older, but it's a lot of young freshmen or redshirt freshmen behind him. Very talented players. And when you think about this game, it'll be the 11th game of the season. So they'll be even more experienced by the end of the year. I think you feel good on paper right now about where you could be at that point in time. But obviously there's so many things that can happen between now and then. And then just keep rushing the quarterback because Sanders will give you a sack or 2 by holding the ball too long. You just have to have a relentless pass rush because you might not get there in an orderly time, but if you keep working, you might get 1 or 2 extra in a game like this, especially if the coverage is good on kind of pre-snap and makes them hold the ball a little bit longer. So what will be the expected result here? Well, they're about a 5-point favorite according to ESPN's FPI. So you figure at home, again, the Arrowhead, maybe not as much of a bump as a normal home game. Colorado might bring good visiting attendance, right? It's back to the Big 12 days. It's close enough travel for them. It's at Arrowhead Stadium, so there's going to be more tickets to be had. So maybe that's a couple points. Maybe KU, at least on paper right now, would be like 7.5 point favorites. All right, let's get on to their regular season finale. KU at Baylor. Baylor has been a house of horrors for KU in recent memory. So we'll discuss that and then the Hawk Cinco preview on Locked On Jayhawks. We are brought to you by Ultimate GM. I want to take a moment to give you a heads up on this brand new mobile game, Ultimate College Football Head Coach. In this amazing game and simulation, you get to step into the shoes of a head coach and lead your college football program to glory. Can you imagine actually being the head coach of the Jayhawks? You know, if you like College Football 25, you like OOTP, if you know what that is with baseball, it's kind of that same idea. You get to recruit players, you get to hire your coaching staff, you get to oversee training camps and handle school scholarships. You control every crucial detail of your program. It's all in your hands. Are you going to be able to handle the pressure? And here's what I really love about the game. You're responsible for calling offensive plays during the game. So your strategy is not only going to help determine if you win or lose the games in that season, but it's going to shape the future and the legacy of your program. Ultimate College Football Head Coach, completely free. It has no ads. It's 100% playable offline. You can play on the go as you want and when you want to. And of course, you have a special offer for Locked On Jayhawk fans. Use the promo code LOCKEDONCFB, all caps, inside the game store to receive a free boost to your program. Make sure to take advantage of this perk as it will get your team off to a strong start. To download the game, just visit ultimate-cfb.com, ultimate-cfb.com, or look it up on the App Store today. All right, continuing on, thank you to the Everydayers tuning into each and every show, and we finish things up with the KU Baylor game. Special award to you if you've heard all the team previews here. And don't forget, you can make Locked On College Football your second listen. We had a Locked On Big 12 show that went on our feed and all our other school feeds earlier this week too, previewing the Big 12, and that was catching up with a lot of the other Big 12 hosts as well. Okay, KU Baylor is the next game up here. So Baylor basically has 19 starters back, which makes them a little bit dangerous, even though they just had a down year. Obviously didn't make a bowl game this past season. And it's been kind of a down arrow for Dave Aranda. He went from being Big 12 champion in 2021 when Jeff Grimes was the OC. Then you drop off. You're still a bowl team in 2022, but you're winning 7 games. Then you drop off to being not bowl eligible in 2023. This is kind of a make or break year for Dave Aranda. Are you going to get back to 7 or 8 wins, or are you going to only win 4 or 5 and then Baylor could have a new coach next season, right? But they did have freshmen play over 4,500 snaps. That was over 1,000 more than the next most in the league. But still, they ranked 10th or worst at every position if you look at Pick 6 Preview's Big 12 position ranks. And they're 8th or worse at every position on Phil Steele's Big 12 position ranks. So neither one too high on them. Offensively, gone is Jeff Grimes. They're going to have a much different looking offense. Jake Spavital, who runs kind of an up-tempo spread passing offense, is taking over there. They're going to either have Sawyer Robertson, who played a lot of games last year when Blake Shapen was hurt, or Toledo former quarterback Daquan Finn, who's a really good runner, not as good of a passer, but he transferred over. And then they've got a good running back room: Richard Reese, Dominic Richardson, Dawson Pendergrass. That's a really good 1-2-3 between the three of them. I mean, Pendergrass might be the third string, and he was like Big 12 honorable mention a season ago. It's a capable receiver room on the outside. I always just think of like Baylor just having speed on the outside, which on its own is dangerous. The line is kind of the big question, though. They were really bad last year. They ranked 90th in offensive line push in the run, 91st in sacks allowed per attempt. But it's kind of be expected when you play so many freshmen, and the offensive line was certainly one of those. Half of their 2 deep by the end of the year at the offensive line spot was freshmen, right? And that's a position that it's really hard to play at the power level, that many freshmen that early. So maybe a big growth for them on the line this season. Now, on the defensive side of the ball, I've kind of just always trusted Dave Aranda to have a good defense, whether he was the defensive coordinator when he was at LSU and some of these other schools, and then his early time at Baylor. Like, he just always has good defenses. But that's what made last year weird. They were ranked 69th of the 70 Power 5 teams in defensive efficiency, according to Pick 6 Previews, and they were last in pass defense. And then on top of that, they lost 2 good players on the D-line. They lost 2 linebackers. They have an experienced secondary after playing a lot of young players, but you lose a lot in that front 7 in terms of players who were starters and impacting things in a very real way. So that's kind of a big question for me. Like, how much better can the offensive line be for them? And what is how much is Dave Aranda worth on the defensive end of the ball to kind of figuring out problems that they had? What's going to be the key for KU in this one? Well, outside of the offense and defense, what about special teams? Because Phil Steele actually gives Baylor the top special teams unit in the entire Big 12. And, you know, late game in the last game of the season could be a little bit colder. It'll be in Texas, so maybe it won't be as cold as if you're playing up in the Midwest or something like that. But ball security becomes important, right? And you think of like a muffed punt at the end of the season. So special teams so important. And KU continuing to have their kicker battle and some of their special teams battles. That's going to obviously be key in this one. Defending tempo and the passing game all over the field. Now, this could be something that the colder weather helps you out with, makes it a little bit tougher to pass. We'll see. I mean, who knows? Maybe it's 70 degrees by that game playing down in Texas. But, you know, for Kansas, they haven't always been the best defense against tempo. I think they were better at it last year than they were the year before. So you hope the arrow continues kind of rising up into this season too. But that'll be the question. And then kind of, I mean, there are a lot of similarities, honestly, to the Baylor game and the Colorado game. Like, Colorado has Shadur Sanders, the star quarterback. Baylor kind of has questions who the quarterback is going to be, right? Colorado has some other star players. But both teams have questions on the offensive line. Both teams are going to throw it around a lot and play at a faster tempo. And I think in Colorado's case, probably more star power. In Baylor's case, even though they were really bad defensively, I trust Dave Aranda to maybe have a better defense than Colorado, but I guess we'll kind of wait and see. So what will be the expected result here? about a 9.5-point favorite right now on ESPN FPI on a neutral site for Kansas. So you figure on the road, 6.5, 7-point favorite, at least on paper right now. But it gets tough knowing that Baylor, A, does have a high ceiling. I've been saying this all offseason, like between Baylor, TCU, I guess Houston, that one seems a little more unlikely, UCF. One of these schools who is sitting on a talent-rich area and has recruited well because they're on that talent-rich area and has more talent than maybe the record would indicate from a season ago, one of them is probably going to break out. What does breakout mean? It could be 8 wins, could be 9 wins. I don't know. Could be 10 wins, whatever. But most likely, one of those at least will have a better season than they had the season before. And you play a couple of them, right? I guess you play 3 of them with TCU, Houston, and Baylor. So we look at Baylor right now, they're bad a season ago, but like, what if all of a sudden Baylor ends up being an 8-win team, right? This game at the end of the season all of a sudden becomes a lot more difficult in that scenario. And then you look at how they have just kind of owned the series. I mean, you haven't been able to beat them in basically like 15 years, and they've blown you out in a majority of those. They've beaten you by 20, 30 plus points. Now, obviously the one that Lance Leipold was around for, KU was getting blown out in the first half, but then fought like heck to get back into it and had it as a 1-score game with like under 5 minutes to go. So we'll see what you can do here, but certainly that'll be an interesting one to finish for KU and could have a lot of pressure to it, right? It could be you need to win this to get double-digit wins, or you need to win this to top last season's regular season win total, or you need to win this to secure a spot in the Big 12 championship game, or to ice something else, right? I mean, there could be a lot at stake for KU in that game. All right, we're going to finish off the Hawk Cinco Room preview on Locked On Jayhawks. We're brought to you by Game Time, which has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes it getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. That's kind of nice, right? And if you're in the area, they have a 50% off Labor Day special for the Diamondbacks and Dodgers game. And, I'm on there right now looking at Royals tickets. Like, you can get Guardians at Royals. That's obviously very big with the race for the AL Central up for grabs with the Guardians, Royals, and Twins all in it. You can go to the game on Monday. I mean, it's a day game, so maybe you skip off work a little bit early, but $8 for the lowest ticket. If you want to go at night on Tuesday, well, guess what? $7 tickets for that on Game Time. And with Game Time, your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, I'm excited for next week, so you're not going to want to miss that on Locked On Jayhawks because guess what? Next week will be game week. So we'll talk a little bit more about the KU Lindenwood game. We'll have the 2 Deep out next week. So we'll do an episode kind of talking about that. We're going to talk about things that do and don't matter to evaluate in this game. We'll get to our preview of the game. We'll, of course, have our recap after the game. So you're not going to want to miss the show that we'll have shortly, very shortly after the game ends on Thursday night against Lindenwood. So make sure you're subscribed anywhere you get your podcast or on our YouTube page. All right, what is the Hawk Cinco position? We did our safety preview on a previous episode this week. Shout out everydayers if you caught it. This is kind of similar to that, but also kind of different. The Hawk position is basically a safety linebacker hybrid. The Cinco position is basically a more defensive back version of the Hawk version, right? So if you have like a full spectrum of, on one end is linebacker, on the other end is defensive back, and then I don't know, maybe safety would be at the other end of the spectrum, right? Hawk is somewhere in between, and then Cinco is kind of in between that and full defensive back, although sometimes you just play another corner as your Cinco, and it's basically a nickel back or a dime back or whatever it is, that you're getting an extra corner out there for pure coverage reasons, right? So this one's kind of interesting because over the last couple of years, Craig Young has occupied a majority of these snaps. So here are the players that I think could be playing Hawk and Cinco. So I think when you're looking at the Hawk, which again, that's more of if you're playing one that is more like a true linebacker, I think Marvin Grant, Jayson Gilliom, Logan Brantley maybe a little bit. Sounds like he'll play a lot of special teams too. And then Alex Reich are the ones to look at. Maybe You get some games later in the season where like John Kamara, because he's such a good athlete, is able to get on the field later in the season when he, I don't know, figures everything else out with the game, with improving his body and getting the scheme and the system and feeling comfortable there and everything like that, because the potential's off the roof for a guy like that. But those are the ones there. As far as the Cinco position, that, again, now you're trying to get even more, I guess, pass coverage out there. I still think Marvin Grant applies in that bucket. Devin or Jalen Dye. I think Mason Ellis applies here. And then you could just say using another corner, right? If it's 3rd down and 14, doesn't it make sense to just, oh, we'll throw out Demarius McGee or Jameel Croft or Jalen Todd in that kind of position, as long as they kind of know what they're doing. So those are the ones that I kind of look at. And then I do think at certain times, it'll be like basically more of a true linebacker type Hawk, maybe in early downs and running situations, maybe in goal line. And that would be more of like Jayson Gilliom and Alex Reich, I think, for the most part, maybe a little bit of Logan Brantley. So what are the biggest storylines from this position? Well, I mean, big shoes to fill without Craig Young, because you had the luxury of Craig Young basically being multiple of those guys all in one. Craig Young was basically a safety at Ohio State. That basically means that he was able to play the linebacker version of the position, the Hawk version of the position, and the DB version of the position a season ago, and I guess 2 seasons ago. Now, we did see more a little bit last year than 2022. He still did get subbed out for more of that DB version at times, because there were times when other teams were targeting him in the middle and early portion of the season in the passing downs. And if he was on a slot receiver, it was a little tougher for him to guard him, because even though he's really fast and really big, maybe not as agile as a like slot receiver. And so he was a very athletic player, really good player. I do think that it was starting to wane a little bit in terms of his usage being, I'm just going to be out here all the time. And it was more of like, I'll be, again, if you're viewing it as 3 positions, the linebacker type Hawk, the DB type Hawk, and the Cinco role. Basically, he was 2 of those 3 by the end, and maybe he started as 3 of those 3. But I think this year it's going to more so be like KU has 1 guy for each. Maybe Marvin Grant occupies the latter 2 of those, but like I think to that quote from Moneyball, the movie, where they're talking about replacing Jason Giambi, the quotes, guys, you're still trying to replace Giambi. I told you we can't do it, and we can't do it. Now what we might be able to do is recreate him in the aggregate. And so that's how you view it. They are recreating Craig Young in the aggregate here, right? It's going to be Jayson Gilliom in this situation. It'll be Marvin Grant in this situation. It could be a DB. It could be Marvin Grant. It could be Devin Dye or whoever in this other situation. And so I think that's totally fine to do it that way. Obviously, it creates its own challenges against teams who are on tempo and are going to keep you on the field in a certain package. And so you still need somebody who can be as versatile as possible. But in a lot of other ways, when you are able to sub or against teams who don't run tempo, you can really do that aggregate stuff as much as possible. So overall, is this position better, worse, or the same to last year? So I think you could say on paper it's worse than last year, because last year you had the known commodity of Craig Young playing that role. But I would actually say it will end up being better in how it's used, because you will really have a lot of guys that are like again, if we're comparing stuff to baseball, it'll be like, okay, this guy we only use when we're facing righties, or this guy's really good at hitting off speed and we're facing a pitcher who throws his curveball 40% of the time. So we're going to put him in his lineup. Like, I feel like you can get a little bit more, as long as you have players who are good at specific roles and you know what you're doing, which I think this coaching staff does know what they're doing. You're going to get them in the right situations. And if you get them in the right situations, boom, you could end up with in a weird aggregate, a better situation. That'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. Back next week for game week. Can't wait. Make sure to subscribe to the show and catch it anywhere you get your podcasts, including on our YouTube page with Locked On Jayhawks.